Well, thank you very much for staying with us here on SA Today. The Moral Regeneration Movement, along with the CRL Rights Commission, are holding a virtual engagement to discuss the role of law in nation building. And let's take you there and listen in on that engagement.
They say that we just want to have a child, and that is it. Why? It's because of what they see in the society, how the society has become a space where they are no longer safe. But once we begin to assure them that there are so many things that can be done, how to handle relationship, and tell the boys how to appreciate women, then they will begin to have a second thought. And when they have their own children, they can pass on those values. So it's a long-term thing, but individuals themselves cannot just do it. The government must take the initiative. And that is why I think the Department of Family and Social Relations is extremely crucial, because that department will be saddled with the primary responsibility of developing a new family structure where values and morals can be used as a means of building the society, starting from the family as the primary agent of socialization. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the detailed answer. Before I go to Advocate Tembeka, Advocate, I just want you to perhaps look at the group chat. There's some questions there that you need to answer. And then I want to ask Prof. Omosoma to probably just give a comment. He had raised his hand.
Thank you so much, Program Director. For the Tembeka Ngokaitobi, I just want to check what you decipher from Mandela's life history and commitment, whether in it you don't see what I would want to call legal activism. Because it's not so much about practicing law, it's about living it. It's about making sure that law becomes an instrument of defense that society can use. Secondly, in your view, the cost of justice or access to justice in South Africa, does it justify the legacy of President Mandela in terms of his vision of society, where inclusivity and participation, at least at the lower level, was an important criteria? That's number one for him. Number two, it goes to the second speaker, Larry. I wanted to check, Larry. We have universities, we have schools, and the schools and universities are supposed to be the place where values are developed, imbued in young people. Have we missed the point since 1994 that we have created and produced in our institutions people who have understood only one way of solving problems, namely violence, conflict, feuds and things like that? And as a religious scholar, how do you account the fact that even the religion today uses violence as a means of solving problems? That, for me, it's a critical issue. We need to deal with these things, because why I'm raising this thing, it's one thing to extol virtues, values. It's another to come up with a constructive proposal. How do we make sure that we build a nation different from the one that we inherited in the past? I think this should be the focus of this conversation. We know what values are. We know what justice is. But knowing justice and living justice are two different things. We may have been taught, for example, about social cohesion, because it's one way of how people saw it. But if this is not working for us, what will work for us? Because we're at the crossroads today. What will work for South Africa? What is the vision of this nation? What should South Africa become? And that's, for me, a critical question to be asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Musoma. Advocate, before you respond, I just want to draw Prof. Maluleke to attention to a question in the chat line. Perhaps you can look at that. So after Advocate answers, I will then come back to Dr. Kaufman. You can then respond and then come to Prof. Maluleke at the end. Advocate Tembeka.
Oh, thank you.
There you are. Here we are.
Yes, thank you. I think what I will do, I'll probably answer three themes rather than trying to respond to individuals. I mean, there's a fascinating point made. I think it's Professor Musoma or Mr. Musoma, which is the question of what to do about Mandela's legacy. And he splits the question into two. So there's the legacy of Mandela, the legal activist, and then there is also the legacy of Mandela, the president. In other words, the constitutional legacies. I mean, both of those are highly contested legacies of Mandela. Let me start with legal activism. So Mandela begins his legal training, like many of us do, drawn into the profession by various interests, and not at the stage he began law, not yet clear whether or not he wanted to use law as an instrument of justice, but attracted to it by various other trappings. It is only when he is inside the legal system that it becomes almost inevitable that if you want to practice law as a black man in the 1950s, it is almost inevitable that you will be involved in some political activity or the other. And this is a kind of conversation that is ongoing between him and Oliver Tambo about what, in fact, will they do with their training as lawyers. How are they going to use the law firm? And the law firm is converted not as a result of a deliberate design, but the law firm is ultimately converted by a push from below. It's the reality, as Oliver Tambo pointed out in his biography. Being black essentially was a criminal act in South Africa in the 1950s. It's the state of blackness was a state of criminality, because the apartheid laws stretched from birth to death. You were always a crime, one way or the other. If you were born in the wrong place, that was a crime. If you happened to step on the wrong street, that was a crime. If you happened to go into the wrong toilet, that was a crime. A wrong school, a crime. A wrong university, a crime. So that entire livelihood, if you were a criminal lawyer in the 1950s, it was almost inevitable that you will be involved in politics, because the state of blackness was a state of criminality, and that is Oliver Tambo's observation. So the activism is almost imposed on Mandela. It is an activism that he cannot run away from. It is inside the law firm, and it is also at home. But Mandela is not a narrow legal activist. I am a narrow legal activist because I'm a legal activist, but I am not involved in politics as such. I'm in politics with a big P. Mandela is also not a narrow activist. At a certain point in time, he comes to the recognition that law on its own will not bring liberation. It will not dismantle apartheid. Apartheid requires a different approach, a different strategy. It requires him to remove the velvet glove so that we can all see the iron fist. That is not to abandon the law for Mandela, but it is to use the law in a complementary way. Because when arrested, remember the strategy that Sobukwe used, that they will not be asking for bail. But when Mandela is arrested, he knows that in order to soften the effect of a punishment, he needs to assemble a team of lawyers. So even though he has decided that he will engage in armed struggle, even that armed struggle itself is restricted in relation to its targets. It's not the kind of an armed struggle that will be destroying everything and anything in its wake, but it will be a targeted armed struggle in order to protect deaths against civilians. And even when the MK is operating outside in the 60s and in the 70s, one of the big topics in MK is how to sustain the Bill of Rights in a military context. And that's when Oliver Tambo says, well, in the 70s, that we must also apply the Geneva Convention in relation to prisoners of war. So at no point does Mandela abandon the belief in the essence of the rule of law and the belief in the essence of the Bill of Rights, even after he has decided that I am now removing the velvet glove. So I see Mandela as a much more in a much more expansive understanding of the in the 60s. I mean, when it was really, really hard, that he was always struggling with balancing the fight against apartheid in its raw form, as well as ensuring that there is some sort of a semblance of law. And this is probably why he did not find it difficult.
All right, this conversation is also available online. It is the role of law in nation building, the Moral Regeneration Movement, along with the CRL Rights Commission, holding that virtual engagement to discuss the role of law in nation building. Of course, you heard there from Advocate Tembeka Ngwaitobi, and the question posed to him was, of course, about Mandela's legacy, and he's chosen to really kind of divide it into two: the legacy of Mandela in his as a legal activist, as well as his constitutional legacy as our first democratic president. So quite an interesting conversation taking place there, which you can certainly find online. All right, let's take a look at